Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, good afternoon from Berlin. On behalf of the Robert Bosch Foundation, I warmly welcome you to today's event, European Perspectives on Taking Forward the UN75 Declaration from Reflection to Innovation and Action. We are very grateful to our partners, the Stimson Center, the Federal Foreign Office of Germany, the Academic Council on the United Nations System, Plataforma CIPO, and Leiden University for implementing and hosting this event with us today. It is our joint mission to facilitate a conversation on how the results of last year's reflection in the context of the United Nations 75th anniversary can be turned into action and help strengthen the United Nations. We hope that this event will contribute to ideas about reform and create further momentum to keep the UN75 conversation going. For today's event, we chose to highlight European perspectives and to look at Europe's role in the wider process with its decades-long support of multilateral cooperation and a rules-based international order. European voices are important pieces in this puzzle, in particular as from the over 1,000 UN75 dialogues, only about 75 came from Europe. Just in time for our event, a joint communication by the EU Commission and the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy stresses that the follow-up of UN75 represents a unique moment to ensure that there is a genuine renewal. It further states that the EU supports the reform process initiated by the UN Secretary General to make the United Nations fit for purpose in today's challenging and changing environment. Within this context, Josep Borrell emphasized the need for more support of multilateralism, but he also warned that the system must prove it works. He said, at a time of growing skepticism, we must demonstrate the benefit and relevance of the multilateral system. The Robert Bosch Foundation was strongly engaged with the UN75 process from the very beginning and remains committed to the crucial next steps. We are convinced that multi-stakeholder collaboration at all levels is an absolute necessity as we try to develop holistic solutions to global challenges. Let us use the UN75 data and make voices of relevant stakeholders heard. Again, I would like to thank in particular the Stimson Center and its dedicated team for this joint event. And I would now like to hand over to the moderator of the public forum, Dr. Richard Ponzio, who is Senior Fellow and Director of the Global Governance, Justice and Security Program at the Stimson Center, who will guide us through the conversation. Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Frecka. On behalf of my Stimson Center colleagues and our partners, the Academic Council on the UN System, the Plataforma CIPO, Leiden University, we are delighted, indeed honored, to be partnering with you and your Robert Bosch Stiftung colleagues, as well as the Federal Foreign Office of Germany on today's program. With over 900 registered participants, we wish to welcome colleagues from across Europe and around the world to today's dialogue, where we will explore the overarching question, in marking 75 years of the United Nations, how can the results of last year's intense reflection now be turned into action and contribute to innovation and strengthening of the world body? On this important theme, our two main goals for today are, first, to identify the international actors chiefly responsible for advancing the UN75 Declaration's vision and individual commitments, detailing in particular the unique capabilities, ideas, and networks within Europe needed to advance the UN75 Declaration against the backdrop of COVID-19. And secondly, to propose concrete ideas and inclusive strategies for the Secretary General to consider for his forthcoming Our Common Agenda report, recommendations that are for strengthening global collective action to realize the UN75 Declaration's full potential and for holding international actors accountable. For today's program, I will engage shortly our four talented panelists over 2 rounds of interactive questions, who will then be followed by 3 distinguished respondents to help us together delve into the post-UN75 follow-through agenda. Since all of our panelists' impressive biographical details can easily be found on the web, and in the interest of time, let me briefly just mention here their current titles Dr. Volker Turk is the Assistant Secretary General for Strategic Coordination in the UN's Executive Office of the Secretary General. Then we'll hear from Ambassador Anna Karin Enstrom, Sweden's permanent representative to the UN and a former UN75 declaration co-facilitator. Next, Ambassador Susan Baumann is the Federal Government Commissioner for Disarmament and Arms Control and the head of the Directorate General for International Order, the United Nations, and Arms Control in Germany's Federal Foreign Office. And our final leadoff panelist is Ms. Kristen de Peyron, Deputy Managing Director for Human Rights, Global and Multilateral Issues at the European External Action Service's headquarters in Brussels. Then, serving as the session's respondents, we look forward to hearing from Ms. Fatima Zaman, who is an advocate at the Kofi Annan Foundation, Ms. Mayara Foley, co-founder of the Plataforma SIPO, and finally, Mr. Sebastian von Einsiedel, Senior Advisor on Internally Displaced Persons at the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. As you've already been shared by Zoom, the Zoom chat function, which we're encouraging everybody to use throughout today's program, you will all have a chance and are encouraged to pose specific questions to our panelists through Zoom's Q&A feature. So to enable us to hear from many of you, we kindly request brief and focused questions. Also kindly leave your name and country, and if you wish, your organizational background too. So let's begin, and to help set the stage for today's dialogue, Volker, last year's milestone UN75 declaration, it calls for the Secretary General to report back before the end of the 75th session of the General Assembly with recommendations to advance our common agenda and to respond to current and future challenges. Specifically then, how can thought leaders and civil society organizations from around the world, including in Europe, contribute their ideas in support of more, quote, inclusive, networked, and effective multilateralism, which we've heard repeated quite a bit in the last year by the Secretary General?
Well, first of all, thank you very much to both Sandra, to the Robert Bosch Stiftung, and to you, Richard, from the Stimson Center for organizing this event. It's great to see so many people connected and to actually reflect about what you are saying about an extremely important document, the UN75 declaration that you have just mentioned. And, you know, there was an unfortunate coincidence by having the 75th anniversary of the United Nations coincide with one of the biggest global threats that we have seen since the end of the Second World War, which is this pandemic. And it's interesting that it wasn't a war or a violent conflict of any sort, but it was a virus that had brought the world to its knees. And I think it really gives us pause to think what the future is like. And there is this paragraph, the penultimate paragraph, and I'm sure that Anna Karin, who was the co-facilitator of this declaration, knows, of course, very well the history of it. But there is this almost innocent paragraph that gives the Secretary General the mandate to report back on what our common agenda means, and in particular when it comes to present and future challenges. And it's precisely that has given us the hook to embark on a very profound reflection process on what type of world we envision over the next 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, because the decisions that we take today will affect the lives of people who are not yet born. So there is a very strong intergenerational dimension to it. And it's also to make sure that precisely we learn from what we are going through today, which is this pandemic and how we recover from it, what the type of challenges that we face when it comes to climate change, the type of challenges that we face when it comes to the loss of biodiversity, that we really need to find better ways of governing and governance, and both at the national level, which is why the Secretary General keeps referring to this need for a new social contract that takes into account young people, that takes into account the diverse, rich fabric of our societies, that takes into account also future generations. So that's really what it is at the national level, but also at the global and at the international level, to see, when we see the reality of today's world, that it is a networked one, that it involves civil society, young people, thought leaders, that it involves private companies. We've just seen it when it comes to the development of the vaccines. how we network better, how we work better together beyond the regular formal institutionalized forms that currently exist within the system, and to be more inclusive about it. And that's our big struggle. And we have launched this process now of this profound reflection, and an event like this can help us a lot to hear from people, to learn from them, to see what it is that you are thinking about multilateralism of the future. And frankly, the jury is out there. There's been a whirlwind of activities over the last couple of months about, you know, getting in touch with different groups, identifying what type of ideas are out there. And it's really, I feel like it's almost an open competition of ideas about the future of multilateralism and the new social contract. So any of you who would want to write to us, please do so. Share your ideas, share your thoughts with us about what type of future do we need and want, and how do we get there through a better social contract at the national level and more effective international cooperation at the global level. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Volker. And we're delighted to hear about this profound reflection process, as you described it, on the future of multilateralism. And as you noted, Anna Karen was the co-facilitator of the UN75 declaration negotiations last year, alongside her colleague, Ambassador Ali Al-Thani from Qatar. What would you say, Anna Karen, were one or two of the most important contributions to the future work of the UN as a result of the declaration? And could you also share your thoughts on, given our theme today, the role that Europeans can play in particular in taking this important agenda forward this year and beyond 2021?
Thank you very much, Richard. It's great to reconnect with you again, and thanks to the organizers. I'm really excited to participate in this event. And of course, the declaration took a big part of my spring and part of the summer. So it's good to come back to the implementation. I mean, I would say that the first point I want to make is the reconfirmation of international cooperation to meet the challenges without borders. And I think we witnessed very much during the negotiations, very much affected by the pandemic. And we saw it first sight, how important and necessary the international cooperation is. And I think the reconfirmation and the manifest for multilateralism that we see this declaration do is very important because of the time that we are actually in, and we were in during the negotiations, a very, very tense geopolitical situation. So I think that's the first point, and the multilateralism that we are also seeing needs to be an inclusive and networked multilateralism, bringing in civil society and other partners to the multilateral work. The second I would say is the reconfirmation of our common agenda. And maybe even more important than that, political confirmation of political will to implement that and to implement the 12 commitments. Of course, they are much based on agreements, Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement and other agreements that we already have. And linked to that, the process of the Secretary General that Volker has already talked about, and the importance of taking the right decisions for the future, so that we are strongly behind our common agenda. When it comes to the Europeans, I mean, of course, they were key in the negotiations. The agenda of the UN, the common agenda, and the UN declaration is, of course, also the European agenda. So they will be the Europeans will be key in the implementation also. And the European Union is in itself a multilateral creation, and we know the benefits and the importance of cooperation. I would also say that the European Union here in New York and elsewhere is, of course, not only a very respected and active multilateral actor, but it's also has very good partnership and relations with the rest of the world. So I think building this strong alliance for the implementation of the common agenda will be very key, and the Europeans are certainly extremely important there. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Karen, and the emphasis on the reconfirmation last year of multilateralism, the need for inclusive networked UN system. Turning now to Ambassador Baumann, with your country Germany, situated at the heart of the European Union, which Anna Karen, of course, just highlighted. How did it approach last year's 75th anniversary of the UN? And what are some of the specific policy tool innovations that you hope may be advanced through the Secretary General's follow-on recommendations expected in September?
Thank you very much. And first of all, let me join others to congratulate you on this very important conference this afternoon. Huge pleasure for me to be a part of it. To answer your question, let me say at the very outset that Germany is a very dedicated and active defender and promoter of multilateralism and international cooperation. For us, multilateralism is the very basis of our foreign policy, not only in terms of a security policy, but also with view to trade, health, environment, or any other policy field. It's simply our mode of working. And I can assure you, and you are all well aware of this, we have learned it the hard way. We have learned that unilateral solutions never work. Despite a widespread criticism and also some obvious shortcomings of the UN, I am convinced that they are really a unique success story. And it has often been said, and I have the pleasure to repeat that, if we didn't already have the UN, we would need to create them. And I think today that is even more true than ever. And we agree with, I think it's 97% of the respondents of the UN75 survey who believe that international cooperation is important for addressing global challenges. The pandemic has been mentioned by Volker, and I can only join him to say that the pandemic is really a wake-up call for multilateralism. It shows that strong and effective cooperation is indispensable to secure peace, stability, prosperity, and to address all the major challenges of our time, from the pandemic to transnational migration, from arms control to climate change. So multilateralism, multilateral solutions are important. Let me mention 3 points which are especially important for our foreign policy, for our approach to multilateralism. First, that's the COVID-19 pandemic, which has demonstrated how much we also rely on a solid scientific expertise and on coordination in global health. Therefore, functioning and efficient and also well-equipped WHO is in our very interest. And therefore, I'm very glad that the European Union has shown strong leadership on this question. I think what is also important here, that's a side aspect, but an important one, is the cooperation between UN and regional organizations, like here in the field WHO. Second point I would like to make is to put the focus on entities such as the Peacebuilding Commission and the Peacebuilding Fund, which is very essential and provides flexibility to the UN Secretary General in terms of financing projects to promote stability, security, and how to take an integrated approach. So focus on a peace-building commission, on the peace-building fund, financial contributions to this are very, very important. And a third and last point, which is important for Germany, and you won't be surprised, is that we strongly support the overdue reform of the UN Security Council. I think it's important that it gets more representative, that the reform reflects also contributions in kind, in personnel to the UN system. And here I think we should also use the occasion of the 75th anniversary to move also forward on the reform of the Security Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Baumann, especially your final 3 points on COVID-19 response, engaging regional organizations, the peace-building architecture, and of course, the central organ on collective security in the world, the UN Security Council. Turning at Kristen, last month, I think it's safe to say that all of our panelists very much welcomed the newly published EU communication, which states, and I quote, "Multilateralism has been and will remain the cardinal principle of the European Union as the most effective means to govern global relations in a mutually beneficial way. But we cannot be multilateralists alone, nor only for the sake of it," end quote. So if you could kindly elaborate on the statement's meaning within the present UN75 context and of course, COVID-19.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here today. Well, as Anna Karin already said, we are ourselves, of course, a multilateral organization, and we have multilateralism in our DNA. So we strongly believe in multilateralism. And why do we do that? Well, because we do think it works. And that's what we need to deliver on the global challenges, be it the pandemic we're facing now, be it climate change, be it biodiversity, as also mentioned by Volker, and many other challenges that just don't know any borders. I mean, we do live in a world, we all recognize that, which is more multipolar and has become less and less multilateral, although we do see some hopeful developments on that front as well. So we definitely feel that we need to have a stronger multilateral approach to be able to benefit the different solutions, and an inclusive one, as I think everybody mentioned so far, because that is key for the trust of the multilateral system, that we really listen to all the different actors, be it civil society, be it youth, be it business, be it other players. Listen, and that we actually, give them a voice as well. So our new strategy, adopted on the 17th of February, is really much the vision that we set out for what we want to revitalize and actually strengthening and modernizing the multilateral system, but also multilateral rules. We call it a joint communication because it's between our High Representative and the European Commission. Our High Representative calls it "Why Multilateralism Matters." And that's really the message that he's pushing through. It matters because we believe that the UN and the other multilateral institutions and with the other partners around the world is the only way for us as EU to be standard bearers of a modern multilateral action, to promote and support democracy, human rights, climate action. But it also means working together with our member states to act together as EU to defend our collective interests and values. Let's not shy away from that. It's also about promoting our own interests and values, and to make better use of our political and economic weight, and to influence the course of international events. The communication, it lists many areas, if you look into it, where we want to do more, we want to do it differently, and we want to do it better. So many of the actions in it tie in, with input to the process of our common agenda. And we will be firm supporters, we can guarantee you of that, of the rules-based international order with the UN at its core. But the world, of course, is very different to what it was 75 years ago. That's evident. So we want a multilateral system that is fit for purpose, so that precisely we can cope with the global challenges that we've all referred to and the geopolitics of this century. So we will definitely continue to support very strongly the UN Secretary General's process on our common agenda and the rejuvenation of the UN system. But we believe that for this, we need a new generation of partnerships, and that comes back to your question, Richard, because we cannot be multilateralists alone. And we have to invest in it. And that's what we need to do, working with partners, governments, but also regional organizations. And as I mentioned before, business, civil society, academia, and many others. But we can't bring everyone together for everything. So we will need to reinforce cooperation, particularly with those with whom we share democratic values, and the return of the US to the multilateral scene does create a lot of positive momentum, but it should not reduce us to play the leading role that we want to play in this. But at the same time, we know that on a number of global challenges, if it's climate change, if it's global health, which will be with us for some time, we also need to create ad hoc issue by issue coalitions. Our cooperation with China on climate change is an example of this. So multilateralism must be effective, it must be fair, deliver results that serve the global interests and values as well as the EU interests and values, and they do coincide, as Anna Karin said. So we will be firm on our principles, but we want to be agile in our conduct as to how we take this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen, and for elaborating on why multilateralism matters, the recent EU communications on this topic. So now we're going to dig deeper on all of these questions, and I'd like to return to Ambassador Baumann. Alongside France, Germany initiated in 2019 a new alliance for multilateralism to demonstrate that states that support multilateralism and the UN remain the majority in the world. With the recent significant change of administration in the United States, is such a coalition still needed? Asks the American. And how could the Alliance for Multilateralism best contribute to the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report?
Thank you very much. And let me first say that, of course, we wholeheartedly welcome the decision of the US to rejoin the Paris Peace Agreement, the Human Rights Council, or also the WHO, and to speak in more general terms, to have a partner that believes in multilateral cooperation, and if I may say so, who cares about having friends. Just last week, we convened the latest meeting of the Alliance for Multilateralism in the margins of the high-level segment of the Human Rights Council in Geneva to discuss their new frontiers of human rights in the light of digitalization, climate change, and we also looked into a pandemic preparedness. I think, if I'm not completely mistaken, we had around 50 countries participating on foreign ministers or ministerial level, and they were joined by the heads of UNESCO, UNCHR, UNFCCC, by Josep Borrell, and the designated Director General of WTO, as well as by many representatives coming from civil society and NGOs, because the inclusion of civil society is very important to the Alliance. So I think that this list, and also the list of topics we have discussed, proves very clearly that the Alliance has become a relevant forum with a broad cross-regional base covering a wide variety of different actors to discuss new approaches of multilateral cooperation, and also to provide a platform to promote initiatives and to enhance in general the visibility of multilateral solutions and multilateralism itself. To look back, when we created the initiative, we were driven by the triad to defend, to reform, and to adapt. And what does this mean? Defend the international rules-based order, reform international organizations, institutions where it is necessary, and to adapt multilateralism in a way that they can also respond to new challenges, to new risks. So against this background, I'm very much convinced that there is still a need for the Alliance for Multilateralism or for any other kind of this initiative, because we are convinced that we need alliances, cross-regional groups of countries which are united in the goal of strengthening the rules-based international order. And in my view, the Alliance for Multilateralism fits very well into the Secretary General's common agenda. I hope we can work together that the Secretary General can really make use of the Alliance, of the initiatives we are trying to promote. And I think a good cooperation, although in the future, will be very important, because at the heart of the Alliance is the idea of strengthening the UN, its institutions, and, as I've said, the rules-based international order, more relevant than ever. and very happy if the Americans and others will join. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm sure the Secretary General's office will want to take you up on that and the work the Alliance is committed to on, as you said, defending, reforming, and adapting the multilateral system. Returning to Volker, you mentioned in your first response today the really powerful concepts that we've heard from the Secretary General on occasion over the last year: a reimagined social contract and ensuring greater solidarity with young people and future generations. How, in the context of the report you'll be working on, do you see these powerful concepts being translated into concrete and practical ways for improving people's lives?
So, first of all, we have one track. I mean, there are essentially 4 tracks of how we want to make sure that we gather as many ideas as possible. One is the track with young people, with the different youth bodies that exist within the UN. There are about 6 youth advisory boards. We have selected 8 what we call next generation fellows who actually are working on a paper for us where they put their ideas down when it comes to social contract and multilateralism. So that, if you like, is a very important part to really engage with the different youth groups, with these global networks that we have, plus with these 8 next generation fellows, and to hear from them what it is that they would like to see when they become, when they grow up, become older, and what type of world do they actually want to see delivered to them and the institution. So that's one. The second one is this member state track, where we have informal consultations with member states through the UN Foundation that tries to gather, I think it creates a space, a safe space for member states to be able to discuss these different themes. Anna Karin mentioned it. The 12 themes are areas where the UN has developed standards over the last couple of decades. They're extremely important. And I see in some of the questions, for instance, on human rights in particular, human rights is absolutely there. It is one of the core functions of leaving no one behind. I just want to mention this. Plus, you should be aware that the Secretary General last year launched a very important initiative, the Call to Action for Human Rights, which has really paved the way for a much deeper engagement on human rights issues, including on a number of them. The third track is the civil society track, the one that we are engaged in, for instance, now, different events, networks, digital consultations, building very much on this listening exercise that the Secretary General really wanted to see occur during the 75th declaration. And then the last track is this thought leaders track. We have identified some 40 thought leaders from around the world and ask them very specific questions about the future of multilateralism and the social contract. What I hope we achieve is, especially when it comes to the social contract, an open, safe space at national, local level that allows people not to go back into social media bubbles, but actually to have an open, diverse discussion and about policies, about where disagreements can actually be debated, and not just where you fragment, or polarize, or divide. And what we have seen much too often in today's world, we really desperately need an open space for discussion, where grievances, where feelings, where emotions can actually be mitigated through a debate, where solutions can be proposed. So the event that you are organizing today is a particularly important one, because I think it's a lot of engaged people around the world who really want to do things together, including from a global perspective, because any issue that we have today, we know it is international. It has transboundary effects. What we heard from Christine on Europe's experience is an extremely important one. But frankly, we need more of that spirit of coming together and finding collective issues. I saw in some of the comments, vaccine issue was there. We need the equity when it comes to the distribution of vaccine. It cannot be that it's only in the high income countries. We are not gonna get out of this pandemic successfully if we are not able to distribute the vaccines everywhere in the world. So that's very clearly one of the messages that we have from the United Nations, but also with the tools attached to it. COVAX is the facility to do that. So I just wanted to mention this. So we build very much on what we have been doing, and strengthen it in order to work on that. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Volker, for sharing with us, our community, how important these 4 tracks of consultations, really encouraging disagreements and new ideas, and reminding us the centrality of human rights to the mission of the United Nations. Kristen, if we could go to a comment that your colleague in New York, Ambassador Silvio Gonzato, many of us really enjoy interacting with. He noted in January that the UN75 political declaration, alongside these 2 other major frameworks for the UN, the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development and the Paris Climate Agreement, should serve as the roadmap going forward. Within this massive agenda, and of course it's against the backdrop of the pandemic, what issues are of particular concern to the European Union, and how are you partnering with allies in civil society in addressing these concerns?
Thank you very much. Well, of course, I agree entirely with Silvio Gonzato, or Ambassador Silvio Gonzato, about the fact that this is our roadmap coming forward. I'd like to focus on 4 basic clusters that we have in front of us, and there we need to work on implementation and concrete action. I mean, evidently, the first one is the pandemic, which is still the most pressing challenge on the agenda. But I would say pandemic and global health in a broader perspective. I tie in with what Volker said about ensuring that vaccines are available to all parts of the world and not just ourselves. That is a top priority. It is a race against the mutants right now, mutations. And that's why we have supported from the very beginning the work of the WHO, and why we continue to support very strongly the COVAX facility. We've chosen really a multilateral approach about over some kind of a vaccine nationalism or vaccine diplomacy or competition. In this area, this first area as well, I mean, we need to be fully mobilized to build back better, and that means strengthening also the global health system, with the World Health Organization evidently at its heart. We need to learn the right lessons of what we've been going through, and we need to be better equipped to face future health challenges. So we're really supporting here the WHO's transformation agenda, and we're leading this year again the negotiations on a resolution on strengthening the WHO and the global response capacity for the World Health Assembly in May. And we're really engaging with all the WHO members to make sure that the organization is equipped with the right mandate, the resources it needs, and the tools. And final element on this point is that this post-pandemic recovery must be transformative. So looking at the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, I mean, the pandemic has put us further behind in delivering on this. So we need to step up if we want to ensure the full implementation of Agenda 2030 and ensure that nobody is left behind. That must be our compass. The second area for action is evidently climate change and biodiversity loss, because these are existential threats to the entire world. So the Paris Agreement is a great example of successful multilateralism, but we need to deliver on it. And we are not doing nearly enough to achieve its goals. So the recovery strategies we adopt now are really important to see whether we can actually deliver on our goals in the Paris Agreement. So of course, there are 2 big COPs this year. There's the Glasgow on climate change, and there's biodiversity in Kunming. And we really need a step change in view of these. The third area is the digital world. This is, of course, a vital domain, and we've all seen during the pandemic how much digital is key to what we do. But it's also an area where there is work to do to harness it. And a key point here is to focus not only on EU-only solutions, because we are working a lot on internal regulation and rules, etc. But we want to work with partners, and we want to set ambitious standards and rules in areas such as taxation, the digital sphere, or artificial intelligence. And the fourth area of action is peace and security. Clearly, the declaration, the UN75 declaration, called for further enhancing the Charter's diplomatic toolbox with a specific focus on preventive diplomacy and mediation. And we really lent our full support to the call for a global ceasefire of the Secretary General. And what we need now is to push for output-focused multilateral cooperation in the UN and other appropriate organizations, whether it's the UN peacekeeping or disarmament or non-proliferation. In response to your question on partnering with civil society, and I'll be very short because I'm conscious of time, This is clearly important for us to strengthen the civil society engagement across the board. So I'm really, encouraged by what we hear about the tracks that Volker set out. And youth engagement in this is something we're particularly attached to. And we were really happy to see the youth engagement at last September's high-level event in this sense. So the input of civil society for us is absolutely indispensable because, we need to ground the action in the real world, just as they grounded the work on the draft declaration in the real world. And we have ourselves engaged heavily in discussions with civil society in accompanying the negotiations at the time on the political declaration, but we will continue to engage civil society as we take, the work forward on multilateralism and supporting multilateralism. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. I'm sure we'll build on some of those points in the Q&A with our audience. Anna-Karin, Sweden has a proud history in supporting the UN's conflict management work. Peacekeeping comes to mind, and of course, the 1325 Women, Peace and Security Agenda. On this subject, kindly share your thoughts as one of the major authors of the UN75 declaration, the specific call for enhancing the Secretary General's conflict management toolkit.
Thank you very much, Richard. And let me first say that I'm very happy that we got a strong text on peace and security in the declaration. I totally agree what Christine said about the support to the Secretary General's initiative on the ceasefire, and I'm happy that that is included, and not only the support but also the promotion of his initiative was included in the text at the time when that issue was actually quite debated. I mean, it's key what says in the text that we are using the entire toolbox of the Charter, not least the Chapter 6 on the peaceful resolution of conflict. And that calls for strong mediation, including using also out of the organization capacity when it comes to mediation. And I think, of course, that the primacy of diplomacy needs to be very strong, and we need to use diplomacy as our first line of defense. And here I hope that we will see some strong proposals coming out also of the common agenda process. So if I can be more specific, 5 quick points from my side. The first, and you mentioned that, Richard, is the inclusion of the gender perspective and women's participation in peace processes. Here we need 20 years after the adoption of the resolution 1325, we still need to go from words to action. There is still way too few women that are involved in the peace processes. It's appallingly low. We need to continue to push for that. Secondly, we need to work with local ownership in the peace processes. We need to work with regional organizations, with local organizations, with civil society. My third point is Peace Building Commission, and I think Susan Baumann referred to that. The Peace Building Commission is key. This is a very good institution. We need to strengthen it more. It needs to be fully financed. We also need to look to that the Peace Building Fund is financed in a better way than it is today. The Peace Building Commission brings together actors, work with governments, and accompany them from conflict to more sustainable peace. My fourth point is working with young people and civil society and women's organizations. That is key in the peace and security arena. And my last point is that we need to look at some of these issues that are cross-cutting, and I will mention the link between climate-related risks and conflict prevention and sustainable peace. We know that climate change and the effects of climate change leads to conflicts and is an impediment to sustainable peace and development. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna-Karin. As we transition now to our 3 respondents and to get a conversation going, I'd like to thank all of our 4 panelists. First up now, with reference to Ambassador Baumann's and Kristen's remarks, Fatima Zaman, please, can you share your thoughts on how policymakers in Europe and elsewhere work to ensure that young people are part of this Our Common Agenda conversation on the future of the United Nations?
Thank you so much, Richard, and hello, good morning, good afternoon to all of our participants. Your Excellencies, thank you so much for sharing and really setting the scene for what I'm about to say. Young people are absolutely, we always use the phrase, young people should be part of the conversation. I will take the liberty to correct that and say young people are the conversation. And what I mean by that is that it is important that we include young people meaningfully, not just as an immediate afterthought or a superficial participation of young people, but they need to be involved. We need to be involved from the design, implementation, and evaluation of policy making. So that is from the very start to the very end, because our perspectives are critical. We can provide an on-the-ground perspective. We can provide an alternative perspective that comes with our lack of wisdom in a way that sometimes policymakers who have been doing this for a long while cannot necessarily see. Particularly in times of the pandemic, what has shown us, what this crisis has shown us is that we cannot leave young people out of the conversation. It is no longer an option to not have us part of this conversation. And the ideal, or the idea that I want to put forward to our participants and our ambassadors today is the idea of a globalization. We've talked about a rules-based international system. We've talked about multilateralism. These are all established, terms that people who work in the policymaking sphere understand. But actually, what I want to talk about is globalization. The fact that young people do a lot of their work on the ground, on the front lines, and are very deeply connected to each other through the social mediums. So we need to amplify those local efforts, those local initiatives on the ground up to the global, and connect the initiatives that are being done in Europe and in other areas to the initiatives of young people on the ground. And by globalizing these initiatives, we can have greater impact at a greater scale. And part of the work that we do at the Kofi Annan Foundation is looking very much about how we can make sure that globalization happens in the policymaking space. And last year, we ran a consultation with at least 28,000 young people from across the globe, all through the medium of Zoom during the height of the first lockdown and pandemic, looking at young people's initiatives to address peace and security issues in the age of the COVID era. And what we found was that overwhelmingly young people were adaptable, they were resilient, and they were far more flexible and agile. Agile was one of the terms that Kristen used, far more agile than our policymakers had been. So if anything, invite us to these conversations, allow us to occupy these conversations, not just as an afterthought, but as a meaningful investor in the future of our common agenda, as the Secretary General put it, and absolutely looking at the initiatives that are being done on the ground and lending the political weight that is in this conversation, the political weight of our panelists today, to amplify those voices and to amplify the good work being done by young people all over the world. So I will leave it there. I've tried to be as punchy as possible, but happy to take questions, and I'll drop the consultation policy paper to the chat so that our participants have it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fatima, and I'm going to welcome any of our panelists to respond to any of our respondents at this point in the program, and your very powerful thoughts on globalization were greatly appreciated. Mayara, as a global governance policy researcher from Brazil, while currently based in the UK, which of the UN75 declaration commitments do you feel merits the most urgent attention? And in your response, I'd appreciate if you could share what you took away from the comments from Volker and Anna Karen.
Thank you, Richard, for the question. Naturally, it's not very easy to choose between 12 very important commitments. But coming from Brazil, a country where a forest area equivalent to the size of Lebanon is being destroyed each year, placing the Amazon, the world's largest rainforest, at the point of no return, given the severity of the situation, I believe that the commitment aimed at protecting our planet deserves the most urgent attention by the United Nations. And this is, of course, not to say that climate action should take precedence over all the other very urgent needs. However, I believe that without immediate collective action to ensure a timely implementation of the Paris Agreement, and without the introduction of effective mitigation and adaptation strategies to reduce climate-related risks, I fear that if we don't do that, we simply might not be given the chance to advance on any other aspects of the UN75 declaration. I think both Mr. Turk and Ambassador Ingstrom very wisely drew attention to the fact that multilateralism needs to be inclusive. It was also said here today that in order to overcome global challenges, we need to find better ways of governance. We need to establish a new social contract that is inclusive and one that takes into account the voice of the young people, civil society, and also the needs of future generations. And I entirely endorse those remarks. And I would only add that in order to successfully achieve an effective and inclusive global governance and advance our common agenda, we must discuss ways of mainstreaming climate-sensitive policies across all 12 commitments of the UN75 declaration. Because how can we build trust in national, regional, and global governance institutions if climate justice is not achieved? And if the effects of climate change continue to disproportionately affect those who have historically been marginalized and excluded from global governance structures and decision-making. Ambassador Ingstrom has also provided very insightful comments on the links between climate change, security, and development, and the necessity to prevent and respond more effectively to conflicts. Again, I couldn't agree more with those remarks, because how can we promote peace and prevent conflicts if addressing climate and security risks and building more climate-sensitive peace missions are yet to become a priority, despite the fact that 10 out of 21 UN peace operations are located in countries ranked as most exposed to climate change. So in concluded, as highlighted by our 4 very distinguished speakers, we must foster international and multilateral cooperation to advance our common agenda. But as young people, or as Mr. Turk said, future generations are likely to be the ones facing the most serious consequences of climate change in the future, I think it is up to us, the youth, to repeatedly warn that we cannot advance the UN75 declaration, nor fulfill the UN Charter's goals of promoting and maintaining peace and security, development, and human rights if we do not make the protection of our planet a priority, and this has to be done now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Myra, especially for really thinking holistically and across the system on all 12 of the commitments and critical linkages such as security and climate that you enunciated. Sebastian, speaking, of course, in your personal capacity, we'd love for you to also share some thoughts on what you heard from Anna Karen and Volker. You know, you've been a longstanding practitioner, but also a one-time think tanker. What does the UN at 75 mean to you? And in your view, how have both this declaration we've been talking about and the follow-on process, how can they help to strengthen the UN system as a global problem solver?
Warm thanks to you, Richard, and to the other organizers for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be part of this meeting. Let me respond to your questions and pick up on some of the other panelists' remarks by making key points. And as Richard said, I'm speaking in my personal capacity, not because I'm planning to say anything outrageous, but because my remarks will very much transcend my day job. I mean, first off, I think in all our enthusiasm for the UN and notwithstanding the opportunities presented by the change in administration in Washington, it's worth remembering that multilateralism and liberal internationalism have been on the back foot for some time. As Foreign Affairs put it recently, we're living through a Wilsonian recession. And we're, of course, all aware of the wider democratic backsliding, the increasing pushback on human rights, the growing nationalism, rising sovereignty barriers, and the specter of Cold War-type paralysis in the Security Council. And the tragedy of the war in Syria, the 10th anniversary we're commemorating this very month, epitomizes the geopolitical moment we're in. And I think all this places a premium on advancing agendas at the UN in areas where the interests of key powers still converge, all while advancing the vision of a network multilateralism. And climate change and COVID response loom large here, of course. And I think the ESG's strong leadership on these two issues has been widely recognized. To a lesser degree, there also remains common ground with respect to conflict management in sub-Saharan Africa, counterterrorism, nuclear non-proliferation, countering organized crime. And we need to build on that common ground to showcase that effective multilateralism is possible even in times of great power competition. Coming to my second and related point, in the face of this Wilsonian recession and in light of today's transnational challenges, we need to advance the notion of multilateralism as the new realism. And I need to give credit here to my friend Elizabeth Cousins, the president of the UN Foundation, for coining that phrase. And what I mean is that we need to build on we need to build the national interest-based case for multilateral cooperation to complement the moral and norm-based and altruism-based arguments. The SG's mantra on COVID, that no one is safe until we're all safe, is a good example of that. Now, not only do these interest-based arguments have the benefit of being true, I suspect they also stand a greater chance of seeing traction among the wider UN membership. And that applies in particular to the leaving no one behind principle, the most compelling argument for which is not that it's rooted in human rights treaties, but that every country should have a strong self-interest in realizing it, given what we know about the strong correlation between exclusion and inequality on the one hand and conflict, violence, and underdevelopment on the other. My third and final point is on the importance of nurturing public support for the UN and participation of youth in the UN that has been mentioned by various panelists. It's of course that public support that underpins the support of governments for the UN. And there is some encouraging news here. The Pew Research Center did a big survey last year in 14 advanced economies of the global north. And overall, that survey showed strong support for global cooperation in the UN, especially among younger adults. But the poll also pointed to two areas of concern that we should think about. First, a little bit like with the US Democratic Party, support for the UN is very much concentrated among educated elites. And I think that reinforces the significance and relevance of the SG's vision, as we've heard from Volker, of inclusive multilateralism, of a reimagined social contract, and of the broader public outreach activities that have been and continue to be undertaken to youth and others. And the second area of concern is a seemingly significant decline in support for the UN in Asia, with a favorability rating in Japan, where I just recently lived for a few years, that dropped from 61% to 29% over the past decade, and a lesser drop in South Korea. These are the only two Asian countries for which we have that data. And that brings me to a larger observation on which I'd like to conclude. I think the UN continues to struggle with the fact that it remains a very Western-centric and Africa-centric organization, and more thought needs to be given, even at a meeting focused on European perspectives, to how we can ensure greater buy-in from Asian countries at a time when demographic, political, and economic weight is shifting towards that continent. Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you so much, Sebastian, especially the point from your colleague that you mentioned, bringing in the notion of multilateralism as the new realism. At 1:30, we're unfortunately going to lose Volker, but I hope you won't mind if we ask one of the questions from our global audience to you before you depart. So it'll have to be a short response. But Mr. Andreas Bummel, who is from Germany and South Africa, he leads a global movement, Democracy Without Borders. He's asked Volker the question: the UN75 Global Conversation Report on the public consultations, the one that occurred last year, 3,500 consultations, I believe, is what it drew upon. It had many ideas on innovation and making the UN more inclusive. There were, in particular, the final report cites 15 frequently cited proposals. Will you look into these proposals in the upcoming Secretary General's ARC Common Agenda report? Do you believe any of these ideas might be picked up?
Well, the short answer is yes. I actually thought I had answered it in the chat box. I've been trying to be multitasking, answering a number of the questions. Yes, of course, we will look at all the results. That's really the intention. But as I was saying, we need to to look to the future and building on this biggest consultation and listening exercise that has taken place ever in the UN. I mean, I know that some of you have asked the question, member states versus the peoples. Well, it is both. The charter starts with we the people, so it is about an outreach to everyone around the world. I mean, it is about world public opinion as well, and it's extremely important for the UN to be able to do its work. Maybe just two other very quick reflections, because I see it, I mean, in terms of the nature of the comments that we get. The UN is an amazing institution. It's present everywhere in the world. It's present in the most remote locations in the world. It's a household name for many people. And I have to say, much more in the global south than sometimes in the global north, because actually we are there to provide humanitarian assistance. We are there to engage with communities, to work with women's groups and youth groups around the world, and not just as tokenism, as part of the fabric of our operational delivery, both on the humanitarian side, on the development front. When it comes to vaccine distribution, let's not forget, and we mentioned it earlier, COVAX is a facility that is managed through this multilateral effort precisely to provide and distribute vaccines around the world. And with the response last year to the pandemic, it was very clear that it's not just about the policy and operation and the normative level. It is also about hands-on work on the ground to deliver to people around the world. And that's very important, because sometimes we are seen as a talk shop. We're seen as producing papers, declarations. No, these words do matter in effect when it comes to influencing situations on the ground. But we can't do it on our own. We absolutely need everyone to be part of it. We need the NGO, the civil society, all of you in the academic, those of you who work in the science area, and that's critical. And my last point on human rights, because I saw that one, I think it is a student from The Hague, mentioned about human rights. I fully agree with you. One of the biggest challenges in the human rights area is to make sure that they are understood as universal and as indivisible. There is no different measure whether you are in a high-income country, in a middle-income country, or in a lower-income country. Very often human rights are seen too much as doom and gloom, and when it comes to violations, they are not seen as a force that inspires people to actually look at economic, social, cultural, civil, and political issues, and they go hand in hand. We cannot divide them into different aspects. We need to see them very holistically and very comprehensively. And unfortunately, what we have seen increasingly is a little bit of a battle when it comes to using human rights, not as a force for change and transformation, but as a force to divide. And we really need to regain that space urgently back, so that human rights is an inspiration for people around the world, that motivates people for what is so critically needed in terms of transformation and social change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Volker, for your thorough and thoughtful responses, especially via the chat box with many of our colleagues. I don't want you to get into any hot water with your colleagues on the 38th floor, so we'll bid you adieu now, but we wish you best of luck to you and your team in drafting the Secretary General's report.
Thank you very much, and all the best to all of you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So with our remaining time, our panelists, including our respondents, you have a tough task, because I have 8 pages of questions that have been brought in. We've transferred them from the Q&A function to a Google Doc. I'm going to go through as many as I can over the next 3 minutes or so, and then use the remaining time. We can go 5 minutes or so over the allotted time for today's program, but I'm going to ask kindly that each of our panelists, including respondents, respond to 1, at most 2 very brief responses, and I'll give some suggestions along the way of who may wish to respond. From our colleague, also German, but from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung New York office, Dr. Volker Lehmann, he writes, and this would be a question for Kristen, as it has the European Union in it. Should the European Union and its member states take the lead in reforming the financing of the UN system so that there will be more money for UN programming and less earmarked funding? That's cherry picking for specific pet projects of donors. So that's a question for Kristen. The next one from Georgios Kostakos, former UN official based in Brussels with a well-known think tank on these issues. He writes, are efforts about contributing to the upcoming Secretary General initiative report, initiatives like COVAX, really global in scope, or at last attempt. Okay, so this is going to be a question for Ms. Baumann, and it's a question about whether the Secretary General's report is the last attempt to defend Western-based post-World War II international order without really reforming or adapting it. He has skepticism then in his question, and engaging other emerging actors and populations. Is it just giving lip service, or is it really working for real substantive structural change? The next question from Maria Emilio Burgos. This is also for Ambassador Baumann, because it's specifically, how has Germany managed to be a pioneer on these issues by managing its foreign policy on climate issues as well? So talking about the broader global agenda, but especially a leader on climate governance. So if you could weave those two questions together, Ambassador Baumann, we would appreciate that. For Sebastian, we have a question. Is there a strong European desire to find a multilateral approach to coping with refugees in the disastrous and growing humanitarian issue that is Afghanistan? So drawing on your work at the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Assistance. No name was left, unfortunately, to share. Oh, actually, this was from, I'm sorry, Corey Butt, who is from Canada. The next question, this would be for Kristen. How will the EU advance its global policy on these issues until 2030? So the 2030 agenda for sustainable development when it reaches its end. So maybe a linkage between the UN75 strengthening of the UN system, and especially as it relates to the very important 17 Sustainable Development Goals. A question for Ambassador Enstrom. This is from Dr. Tad Daly, all the way out in Los Angeles, California. Thank you for joining us at such an early part of the day. He'd like to ask about the prospects for a follow-on intergovernmental negotiation, specifically what some in the NGO community are calling a World Summit on Inclusive Global Governance. And he's asking about your predictions on the likelihood of such a World Summit taking place in the coming years. What would the prescriptions be for advancing this possibility? What are maybe some of the political dynamics that would be needed to allow a follow-on intergovernmental process? Tough question for Ambassador Enstrom, given you must still be exhausted from all the negotiations that went into the declaration. I want to get two more questions into our colleagues, Fatima and Mayara. And for Fatima, I have a technology question from Mandu Al-Qadisi. He asks, how much technology is necessary for processes such as UN75, not only consultations that we saw, the Secretary General's conversation last year, which I believe you were intimately involved in, but now the current tracks of consultations. There's one for the new next generation of young leaders. In particular, what efforts are needed to leave no one behind regarding world connectivity and digital cooperation? And finally, and I'm trying to find something on climate for our friend Mayara Foley. Now, the tough question, but I'm going to ask it anyways, from Ellie Cumberbatch from the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict, GPAC. And she has a long question about understanding conflict prevention is a critical tool for building peace and just societies, and the assessments of the impact of this action must be locally led at the same time. Her question then is, how can the common agenda, our common agenda of the Secretary General, become a tool for concrete progress and help make a step forward towards the practical implementation of conflict prevention? So, very broad number of questions. It shows you the sweep of the issues that we covered, and particularly glad, though, we're going to hear, starting off from Ambassador Baumann and Kristen on the distinct European perspectives to these issues, and then I think we'll broaden out globally when we hear from Mayra and other colleagues. So, Ambassador Baumann, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting question. So climate change, I think it's obvious that European countries, that Germany has to take a leading role on this, because for us to counter climate change is really a question of survival. And we have heard from a couple of panelists and here today how important it is. So we will do everything to make the COP26 conference in Glasgow a success. I think that's the next milestone on the international level, but we also have taken up national measures. I don't have the time to go into detail right now, but let me make 2 points which are clearly linked to the UN. During our 2 years on the Security Council, for us it was very important to establish the link between climate change and security. I think it's an obvious link when you look to areas like the Sahel or to the Horn of Africa. We will continue this work with a huge group of friends with cross-regional support, very important, and looking to the question of climate change and human rights. That's also an area we have to focus on, and the discussion in the ongoing Human Rights Council very clearly show that also these questions gain traction. The first question, structural change, reforms, yes, they are necessary. We have to engage permanently, continuously on reforms. We support all the proposals by the UN Secretary General, working now very intensely on their implementation. And the UN system has to be ready and has to be fit to respond to new challenges like the pandemic. And the COVAX facility, ACTA, has been mentioned. We are convinced that's the only way forward, and we contribute to the functioning of these institutions. As it has been said, fair global distribution of vaccines is a must.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Baumann. In the interest of time, I won't repeat the questions, but if you could kindly, as you're responding, next we'll hear from Kristen.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping my my device won't die because my cable is not cooperating very well, but here we go. On funding, I mean, obviously, I think you know that that the EU member states as such are very big funders of the core, you know, when it comes to CES contributions to the UN system. And we as EU per se, we contribute to agencies, funds and programs, specific projects, etc. But we do work very closely hand in hand. And, you know, we're definitely working to ensure that the UN is fit to deliver on its mandate, and that, you know, the use of funding is also effective, and that we, you know, focused and effective. When it comes to our own ambitions, when it comes to the EU as such, I mean, we also believe in what we call a Team Europe approach. This has become a very known sort of methodology for us since the COVID response, where we can together also more effectively leverage what we, you know, leverage our contributions and in support of be it the UN or be it other multilateral projects and priorities. To the second question, how will we advance in our policy, you know, the SDGs, the 2030 agenda, and I think the question was even until 2030. Well, for us, there are a couple of things that are very important. The first is the link between the multilateral and the bilateral. So we bilateralize, if you like, our multilateral commitments. So that means that in our cooperation, in our policy with partners, be it in our development assistance or other areas, we also integrate the SDGs, and they are at the, you know, the core of what we do, and other multilateral commitments for that matter. So this is the link, and it also goes for the policy area in terms of, you know, multilateral policy discussions and debates. They're also followed up in the bilateral area. Secondly, we are now we're starting what we call a new multi-annual financial framework, which means that we're right now programming what we will be doing in the next 7 years. I mean, starting from now, and we have a much better overall instrument that pulls together many of the different types of instrument that we did. And it's clear that, you know, the SDGs Agenda 2030 is very much at the core of what we do here, be it, you know, in all the different areas, be they thematic or be they geographical areas. So that's really how we do it. We integrate the multilateral into our own work. And we also, of course, it's not just about delivering on this on the external front, it's also about delivering ourselves. And that's what we're trying to do with the European Green Deal, which, you know, for us as EU and EU member states, that's what we're trying to do when we focus on some of the other areas that are core priorities of the European Commission. So it's the internal, it's the external, it's the coherence between the two, the coherence between the multilateral and the bilateral. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Turning then to Anna Karen. Really easy question. Are you ready to start work on the next big program action following the UN75 declaration?
Well, thank you very much, Richard. Can I just say a few words on the, just a few comments on our respondents, because I think I wanted to say that when we started this work, the starting point was very much the we the people, because we felt strongly that we the peoples have been set aside for we the nations, and this is why we also sort of developed this declaration in a way with the language with young people and the outside world in our mind. So it's written in a different way. It's not based on already agreed language. It's written in a way that everyone can understand, and the objective of that is, of course, to bring in and make this process an inclusive process. So that I wanted to underline that. I also wanted to say to Mayara that I totally agree with her on the importance of climate change. And if you look at the declaration, we start with the leave no one behind, because that is very much on the we the people's side. The second is the planet, and I totally agree on the importance of delivering on that to achieve the rest of the declaration as well. It's key. And there are some things here that are important. We cannot wait. We need to take transformative measures, and we need to work with the sustainable consumption and production, and of course the green gas emissions. I mean, those parts of the planet commitment is key for the future. I totally agree with that, and I totally agree with what I said before, and what Mayra also pointed at, the link between climate change and conflict. And this was an issue, of course, that Sweden worked very much with when we were in the Security Council. I think, I mean, I'm not aware of the summit on that the question referred to, but I think what is important is that we need to discuss what structures we need for the future in order to make what we call this networked multilateralism, the inclusive multilateralism. What structures do we need to bring these other actors in? How do we bring the young people in? How do we bring the local actors? How do we bring the regional actors in a better way? I think this is a key issue for the future, and I imagine that this is also part of the common agenda process that we are discussing right now. So without going into the details of a summit, which I'm not really aware of, I think it is really, really important of the structures. I mean, we are dealing here with challenges that know no borders. And for that, we need to have structures that can manage them, structures that are multilateral. And to deal with them in a sustainable way, we need to bring in all the actors that can work together. And I totally agree with what Sebastian said about the multilateralism as a new realism. I think, and this was also part of our discussion with the declaration, we need to make sure that it's clear that multilateralism is in the interest of states, of national states, and it is in the interest of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Karen, especially for responding to the rich inputs from our colleagues, the discussants, for today's program. And we fully expect and hope that you'll be one of the leaders if there is a follow-on process to take forward the Secretary General's recommendations after September. If we can kindly ask our final three respondents to be extra brief so we don't go over too much time, but very eager to hear from Sebastian, the question on the humanitarian response in Afghanistan.
Thanks so much, Richard. Now, in all frankness, I'm not particularly well placed to respond on the specifics of the humanitarian response in Afghanistan or European perspectives on Afghan refugees. But let me take up the challenge of addressing issues faced by the humanitarian system, because it hasn't come up much. So just a couple of points. Now, it's worth remembering that even in places where the UN has failed politically, like Syria and elsewhere, we still help save tens of thousands of lives every year. In Syria, we managed to provide humanitarian aid to an average of somewhere around 6-7 million people every single month for the past 6 years. In Yemen, 9 million people per month on average last year, and that's down from 14 million the previous year, where we helped prevent a full-fledged famine. And that's very important to acknowledge, but it's of course only a band-aid. Now, the challenge we face is that while humanitarian funding has actually grown year after year after year, humanitarian needs in recent years have grown even faster. So the gap between what we have and what we need is widening every year. And COVID has made that challenge, of course, all the more acute. The people we're now targeting with humanitarian aid has grown from 110 million to 160 million within a year. That's a crazy growth. And at the same time, the financial burden is not shared in anywhere near an equitable manner. Nearly 90% of humanitarian funding comes from our top 15 donors, and somewhere around 70% from our top 5 donors. Of course, heavily concentrated in Europe, and that's unsustainable. And so part of the challenge we're facing and we need to think about as we look ahead is how we can address the fact that the humanitarian system is so overstretched. And it requires really kind of action on multiple fronts within the humanitarian system and beyond. As far as the humanitarian system is concerned, we need to work on the agenda, and our leadership is doing that, strengthening partnerships with local humanitarian actors, the so-called localization agenda, strengthening partnerships with private sector, broadening our funding base, and investing in anticipatory action, because as we know, it is more effective and saves lives and money. I will leave it at that. Thanks so much, Richard.
Thank you, Sebastian. And Fatima, the big question about technology in our lives today, both to leave nobody behind in today's globalized world economy. But I think the question was also about any lessons or reflections from the Secretary General's global conversation and now the Our Common Agenda consultations that are ongoing.
Thank you so much. Firstly, my express thanks to Stimson for hosting this conversation, allowing me to be part of it. 2 things. When we participated in the Secretary General's consultation, what struck out to me on the technology point is that this is a very privileged conversation. I have access to technology, I have access to a secure internet connection, and I have access to a device that will allow me to connect to other young people and the Secretary General. So I recognize that I was coming from a point of privilege. Not every young person can be captured in this way. Not every young person without this access can be captured in any way. So at the same time of running these consultations and moving forward with the recommendations and the solutions that we've put forward, is that a parallel process has to be followed about giving access to young people to technology, giving access to young people to the internet. The internet must be a global public good. I've said this at the UN, I've said this at the G20 last year, and I will continue to say it where people are willing to listen. Without access to this technology, without making the internet and these devices a global public good, we cannot consider touching the lives of the uncaptured youth, someone like me, I turn up wherever I'm invited. I'm a captured young person. A lot of my colleagues who want to be part of this conversation physically cannot or are not being reached. So these are the young people that we need to engage. And I am calling for that as much as I know senior policymakers in the UN system have been calling for that. So it's about understanding what parallel processes are required to be able to give access to those who do not have it and who deserve it the most. And the final point that I will make is we've talked a lot about the Charter and the words of the Charter, we the peoples. As having worked for the late Kofi Annan, it was one of his favorite things to say. But I want to put forward the idea of a young person's charter, and if this is something that the ambassadors take back to their missions, to their countries, and to the Secretary General himself, is that we need a young person's charter that says we the young peoples of the world. We make up 2.8 billion people of the young population, a growing population at that, and we are the future. So considering we the young peoples and having that at the forefront of any policy conversation you are having that is to do with us, that is about us, please remember these words. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fatima. And last, certainly but not least, Myra, the Secretary General has just asked you to be the lead author of his big Our Common Agenda report. How do we feature conflict prevention at the heart of the report's recommendations?
Thank you, Richard, and thanks for the question for our colleague from GPEG. I don't have much time, so I think I'll summarize in one word, which is mainstreaming. And not wanting to sound a bit repetitive, but I think if we do not mainstream climate sensitive policies into all aspects of our common agenda, we won't see much progress. I know the question spoke about the importance of creating more effective preventive mechanisms. And on the other hand, we have evidence showing that climate change enhances the spread of infectious diseases, it reduces human and food security, it disrupts access to basic services such as health and education. And I would say that we can never be prepared to prevent new health crises, to prevent instability or conflict if we do not take climate action more seriously. So for me, again, climate mainstreaming is the key word, knowing that, I don't have much more to elaborate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Myra, and all of our panelists. I'm sorry that we've run out of time. We'll certainly want to continue this conversation in many ways in weeks and months ahead, the 4 tracks of consultations that Volker Turk outlined in his remarks. Let me take this opportunity to thank all of our panelists and respondents for stimulating today's rich discussion, as well as all of you, our global audience, for participating and contributing your ideas and questions to our panelists. Finally, I wish to express my appreciation to our co-sponsors for today's event, the Robert Bosch Stiftung, the Federal Foreign Office of Germany, the Academic Council on the UN System, Leiden University, Plataforma SIPO, and my colleagues at the Stimson Center. Thank you once again for joining us and for your commitment toward making the UN75 declaration move forward in 2021 and beyond. Have a great day.